Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. So for those of you that are Catholic or Christian, is it like totally politically incorrect to say Happy Good Friday? I don't know. But as of Sunday, Happy Easter. I know that's cool. So today we have a show that is totally not Easter related, but I did want to put that out. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking to Thomas Fusco about Behind the Veil, a new vision of reality. And in the second hour, we're going to have Eldon Taylor on and talk about what you believe matters. And don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, clairvoyant, a.k.a. psychic readings, or energy medicine and healing work. And so please do visit soulhealer.com and check out all the great stuff that's on that site. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com, where you can learn to become a medical intuitive, clairvoyant, or energy medicine practitioner. If you're interested in any of these shows, they all are kept in the archive at the Just Energy Radio webpage. That's www.justenergyradio.com. You can also sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep you informed of our excellent programming that's coming up. Also wanted to let the listeners know that we have started archiving the shows on YouTube, and so if you have easier access to YouTube versus the webpage, please do go and check them out there. We've been doing it for the last few months, and it seems like it works pretty good, and, you know, it's so easy to stream things on YouTube, so that's just another possibility. You know, you can listen to it in your car, on your iPhone or your cell phone. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Thomas and get him on the air. Thomas Fusco is an independent researcher who has devoted nearly 3 decades investigating the relationship between mind, physics, spirituality, parapsychology, scientific anomalies, and paranormal phenomena, with the goal of uncovering the unifying cosmological framework that has eluded mankind for generations. He has been invited to speak as a guest on numerous radio shows, including Just Energy Radio. And how could it be any better than that? So please welcome to Just Energy Radio the author of Behind the Cosmic Veil, Thomas Fusco. Hey, Thomas, how's it going?
Very good, Dr. Rita. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. I think we'll have a pretty interesting and lively conversation. I like having lively conversations. And, you know, when I'm feeling a little tired, they tend to be just a little more interesting and lively.
It must be because you're closer to that alpha brain state or something, right?
I don't know, but sometimes I just am surprised myself, the things that just fly out my lips. And then I go, ooh, did I just say that? But let's go back to you. How did you get interested in this whole paranormal physics, area in the first place? What's your story?
Well, I've always been a very pragmatic and scientifically minded individual. Very much loved science as a youth, and really had kind of a black and white way of looking at things. And in my teen years and early 20s, I had several different what you might call parapsychological experiences that kind of took me back and caused me to consider what I had been taught about the nature of the universe from my conventional education. And what I wanted to know was what kind of a universe would allow these types of things to take place. There had to be some sort of a mechanism behind them. The universe is put together in a very specific way, and so there must be a way to understand all that we can experience and observe. And so it was that kind of a premise that set me on the path to research all these things and come up with that unifying framework that ties all of it together.
Interesting that you came at it from a scientific point of view. You know, I'm interested in a lot of the same topics, but I came to it from a more personal development, spiritual point of view. But I think when you start looking at one side, you end up having to look at the other side because it's part of the picture. You kind of can't get around it.
Yes, for me, personal experience, and even to go as far as saying philosophy and even metaphysics has always been, to me, too subjective. It seems to vary based on each individual's personal experiences and perspectives. And, of course, we are, each one of us, all a little bit different. But for me, the challenge to that was to try to find something where pretty much you can hang your hat on. So that 2 + 2 = 4, for example, very simple mathematic equation, transcends personal subjectivity. And so I really wanted to find something that was very tangible and something that would actually not only tell us something specific about the way the universe is put together, but offer us a model by which we could make predictions that were scientifically testable, which, of course, philosophy and metaphysics and those kinds of things really doesn't help us with.
Actually, in my personal opinion, I think that just the fact that there are a number of spiritual traditions that address the experience of it, at least give us something that we can go and hang a handle on, you know, attach a word to, versus trying to come up with this whole vocabulary of what these experiences are.
Yes. Certainly,
you know, they might not be scientific, you know, but at least it's giving the conceptual aspect of it.
Yes, and I agree. For me, of course, the challenge was, let's take, for example, a belief in the existence of God. Is that something that many people can share in common and sort of hang their hat on? Absolutely. But when you get past that initial concept, the idea of what God represents can vary almost with each individual that you talk to, even within a particular religion or even a particular denomination within a religion. So for me, although those things are very important, I wanted to have something that was much more, I don't know whether I want to use the word tangible, but something certainly much more concrete, that if 100 people look at it, each of those 100 people will see the exact same thing.
And I know that area, and I'm going to say in more recent years, you know, the last 10 or 20 years, has been getting more recognition, more research time, research dollars. You know, people like yourself or our mutual friend David Roundtree or Lynn McTaggart or, there are individuals as well as some scientific people, that, come out, like William Tiller, that's who I was thinking of, who are looking at this whole concept of the fabric of our world that is unseen and looking to put some kind of, law.
Hello?
So did you get dropped too, or was it just me?
Yeah, I heard a big crackle, and then I didn't hear anything after that.
Yeah, well, I got dropped. I didn't know if you hung up. But anyway, somebody said, we have guests but lost host. Yeah, so if I just disappear and you think you're still there, just talk, because I have not had this problem in a long time, but apparently today might be the day. I just don't know. And actually, I'll share this story with you. Whenever I have people that come on and talk about ghosts, whenever I go on to another show and talk about ghosts, I always have phone problems.
Wow.
Every show.
I
mean, I've had 4 or 5 of my last interviews. 3 didn't happen because they couldn't get me connected, or I keep dropping, or weird stuff happens. Only with ghost shows, or if I have a ghost conference the next day, or I just came from one. It's really bizarre. So, yeah. Anyway, so when this goes into the archives, this will be edited and fixed. Anyway, let's get back to where we were. I mean, we're live right now, but I will fix this. But I'm sure everybody enjoys our just chit-chatting about the problems of technology. Anyway, so do you remember what my question was before we were so rudely disconnected?
Yes, you were talking about the increasing attention with certain individuals within the scientific community to try to take a more serious look at some of these aspects of our experiences, our personal experience, which have been pretty much in the past confined to a religious, perhaps, or even a philosophic or a spiritual point of view.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the way I've tried to look at it, again, is to try to take a very scientifically reasonable and consistent foundation and operate from that. So one of my paradigms, one of my premises is that we often as human beings look at things very, and I don't mean to use the word in a negative way, but we look at things very egocentrically. We experience all these different types of sensations and thoughts and things like that within ourselves, and then we see outside of ourselves a relatively static world in comparison to what we see inside. And we come away with this, what I consider an illusion, that the reality within us is somehow different than the reality outside of ourselves. And from a scientific perspective, that really cannot be true. Every system is governed by a set of laws and principles that not only establishes its behavior, but also its very structure. And every subsystem or subset within that system operates according to those same principles of the greater system. You cannot have a subset of a system operate in contradiction to or outside of the laws and principles that govern the system in which it's a part. So when I look at the universe and then I consider the human brain is a subset of that universe. Therefore, everything that occurs within the human brain is according to and consistent with the laws and principles that establish and govern the greater universe. And so in that way, I break down a conceptual barrier. And then if we study things about the human brain and the way it behaves, we can actually begin to relate it with the greater universe at large and start actually getting physical, concrete reference points and, correspondences, so to speak, between that inner and outer.
And that makes sense, looking at the microcosm and applying it to the macrocosm, and then turning it the other way around. This is what's going on in the macrocosm. Is the same thing happening in the microcosm? It just makes me think, they're in physics, they've come up with the whole string theory idea, which underlies, what's going on in physics, but then I'm assuming that there's going to be something that sits underneath what, they're talking about, these multidimensional strings, and they'll just get finer and finer, until I think they will get to, in my opinion, some kind of an energetic, photonic, energy state.
Well, if you've read my work, those who have know that I'm not a fan of string theory. I'm kind of more Einsteinian in my philosophy. Einstein stated that whatever the final theory is, it's probably going to be simple enough that a 6-year-old could understand it. And so that's kind of the way I've gone with it. To me, there are some basic realities that are much simpler to understand and answer a lot more questions. String theory and some of its derivatives, for example, are dependent on the existence of a graviton, and we're talking a little bit of physics now, but we have no evidence that a graviton exists. We only have an assumption based on a paradigm that says that everything in the universe has a material cause. And, of course, that excludes anything spiritual. But we've never been able to confirm that the graviton exists. If you eliminate the graviton as something that's real, then string theory all collapses. And a lot of these other involved theories go down the tube as well.
But, one of the things that you talk about in your book, which I wanted to kind of bring up, is, issues with scientific theory, and some of the concepts that they put out there that are based on a hope and a prayer. And so I would just take string theory and throw it into that whole category.
Yes, many of these types of theories are, again, a result of what establishment science, they all know, but they don't like to publicize, which is the idea that everything must be based on a purely materialistic explanation. There cannot be anything outside of the material. There cannot be anything outside of the spiritual or anything like spiritual. That doesn't reckon into reality at all. And so this is where they get into a lot of problems. The other thing that establishment science is prone to do is to present theory and conjecture to the general public in an air of certitude as if it was an actual fact. And one of the things that we've heard like that a lot in recent years is the subject of dark matter. You will hear all these physicists speak of dark matter as if it's a foregone conclusion. And the true reality, the behind-the-scenes, quote-unquote, trade secret aspect of it is that they all know that it's just an imaginary substance. They don't have a shred of hard evidence to show that that actually exists.
But it seems like there's a lot of that, that I forget how you phrase it, but of them putting out conjecture as truth. I am finishing up a book, and part of my research, I was looking at the age of the universe, okay, because it has this big timeline base to it. And so I wanted to start, at the beginning of time with the Big Bang, another theory, and kind of work from there. And so they were saying that, the universe is, 13 billion years old, whatever the number is. Well, then you start actually reading into and digging into some of the science behind it. It's like, well, but they don't really even know how big the universe is. We can only see out so far, so they go, well, we can only see so far, so that's how big it is. I'm like, well, what kind of crap is that? And it sounds like some of the stuff you've researched, you're like, well, what kind of crap is that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And, of course, you know that the point I make is this, is that all of that is all well and good. Please tell us, lay people, that to the best that you can reckon, with as far that you can see, that we estimate the universe to be 13 or 14 billion years old. Don't tell us that this is what it is. Tell the truth. Don't present conjecture and speculation and theory as truth. Present it exactly for what it is. The perfect example that I use is to talk once again about gravity. And everybody remembers being taught about gravity in school, and they were taught all the different types of things that gravity does and the characteristics of it. But what was missing of it from almost everyone's education is the idea that what you were really being taught about was gravitational effect. That's all you were taught, and that's all we know about. We know quite a bit about gravitational effect, but the actual substance of gravity, what gravity is, we don't know. And that's not anything that you get taught in school, and that's not anything that you hear publicly from the establishment.
Yeah, and it's almost like kind of splitting hairs, I bet, in some people's minds. It's like, okay, gravitational effect, what gravity is. But, having you say that, one, I've never thought of it in those terms. It's like, well, yeah, everybody knows what gravity is. But the reality is, no, we don't. That is so right. That's a great insight. One of the things that you talked about. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, it was based on a 19th century assumption, a pure assumption, because gravity appeared to behave in an attractive way like electromagnetism does. It was assumed that gravity must be a force, a real force, that's very similar to electromagnetism. And this is what science has operated under since. It's operated under that assumption, but it's never been able to prove it.
I mean, one of the things that you talk about in your book, kind of in this same area, was the theory of evolution, which that's one of I love the theory of evolution, both the pros and cons around it. And so I was wondering if you could just talk about that, what you found in your study of the theory of evolution and, the evolution of our planet. Not the planet, but the life on the planet. Because I thought it was pretty interesting, and I just as soon have you share your insights into that area.
Yes, evolution is a theory. It's definitely presented as fact, again, by the scientific establishment. But it purely is a theory, and it's based on available evidence, and it has a lot of strong evidence to point in that direction. But once again, there's certain weaknesses, there's certain missing pieces, so to speak, that prevent someone with intellectual honesty to say that theory is sound in its entirety as it now exists. And I talk about a couple different things in the book. I talk about, again, some more trade secrets. That evolutionary theory seems to work very well based on the natural evidence that we can accumulate when we talk about the origin of species. But when we begin to talk about the origin of genera, of the genus part of it, evolution has a lot of gaps and holes in it. It doesn't really tell us, for example, where the first fish came from. It can tell us how fishes evolved into all different types of species, but it says nothing about where the first fish came from. We understand, so to speak, where birds, we see this Archaeopteryx, which is a tough word to say, this dinosaurian bird that had feathers like a modern bird, and they paint this fanciful picture of all these different evolutionary steps that led up to this animal, and then the evolutionary steps that led afterwards to the modern bird. The problem is that creature just simply appears in a certain strata, geological strata, thrives for a while, doesn't change throughout its entire lifespan, and then simply disappears, leaving no progeny and having no ancestors that we can find that lead up to it. So for me, the biggest problem with evolution is that any system, any theory that describes a progress, a progression from one stage to the next, like a chemical reaction, so to speak, has to begin with the starting premise, the starting state, and then it goes from there forward. The problem with evolution is that the theory can give us nothing about how life began. Evolution says nothing about how life began from inanimate matter. The other problem with evolution is that it's not a scientific theory because it cannot make testable predictions. And for me, for evolution to be a valid scientific theory, it would have to be able to take the current state of life and tell us what a squirrel is going to look like 10 million years from now. Since it can't do that, it can't make testable predictions. So for me, evolution is a statement that begins in mid-sentence. The last part of the sentence sounds fine, but without the first part, there is no complete or coherent idea. Hello?
Thomas, you're supposed to just be talking.
Oh, okay. Well, I was finished with what I was saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, kind of into the whole evolution thing, I just wanted to make one comment. I was interviewing Dr. Amit Goswami, who has a book on creative design. One of the things that he brought up, he goes, how did we develop eyes? Because there are animals that don't have eyes, and then eyes all of a sudden appear on the scene. And then there are animals that live in the depths that don't need vision because it's too dark, and those animals, even though they might not have eyes or might not be able to see, but they still have the location of where the eye had been. It doesn't go away. And I'm like, what a interesting little insight into, it's not an answer, but it makes you go, yeah, that's true. That's an interesting point to the whole thing. So, anyway.
Well, one of the points I make in my book has to do with these deep-sea creatures. Now, according to evolutionary theory, life evolves by adapting to its environment and even to its changing environment. But we have situations in the deepest part of the oceans where there is life, but there is no light that penetrates through in order for eyes to be useful. Yet many of these creatures are not blind, and what they do is they actually have what we call bioluminescence, where there's organs on their body that actually generate light. Now, on the surface, this may kind of slip under or through the back door, so to speak, of evolution. But when you take off the cover and look at it very, very carefully, you understand that bioluminescence in the depth of the ocean is actually an example of the environment evolving to life. That light actually evolved through living matter in order to provide it in a place where it didn't exist. And that isn't Darwinism. That's something more than what evolution can tell us.
It's God. That's what I used to tell my son. It's like, if I didn't have an answer, it's God. It's out of my hand, out of my area of knowledge. One of the things that I do appreciate with these theories is it gives you a different perspective of looking at things, exploring things, see how they fit. Using the theory of evolution, it really gave society, a different way of looking at how we're here, and raising a lot of questions and having people looking for answers in a different way, as opposed to, on the sixth day, God created us and poof, we were on the planet.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly there are some religious fundamentalists, and not just simply Christian ones, that adhere to a particular belief no matter what evidence is presented to the contrary. But even from the biblical standpoint, when we take a very careful look at what the Bible says, putting aside, denominational precepts and doctrines and preconceptions, there's a number of places in there that show that these numbers that are being used are highly symbolic, that the Jewish tradition was very steeped in numerology. And as we know, anytime we talk about numerology in its various forms, we talk about numbers having symbolic meanings that correspond to certain aspects of reality. And so it's very iffy to place literal numbers or literal values on the numbers we find in the Bible. For example, the psalm that says about God, for 1,000 years are like a day in your sight. And so people have taken that literally and say, well, the earth was created in 6 days. The psalm says 6 days, each day is like 1,000 years to God. So the earth must only be 6,000 years old. But they didn't read the last part of the passage, which says, or a watch in the night, which corresponds to a 4-hour century period. So using that same formula, then the earth must be 24,000 years old. And so the clear implication is that the psalmist was speaking figuratively, symbolically, and he wasn't speaking literally.
I mean, I think that, when they put these numbers in, they there's some significance, like it's letting you know it's a really long time, but going and putting, this is a specific thing, because we don't necessarily know what the base is or where it's starting from, because we don't even know when they're referring to some ancient occurrence, when that actually happened, so.
Absolutely. And again, having an education about the history and the culture helps too. The numerology example, which ancient Judaism is one good example. The other example is that in the ancient world, it was very common for certain cultures to use the number 1,000 in colloquial speech as a rough equivalent for infinity or for too numerous dimension. It's like what we would say today, well, that person's so rich, he or she has $1 gazillion. Well, gazillion isn't a real number. It just expresses a number that's so huge it's uncountable. And in the ancient cultures, that number 1,000 was often used in the same kind of way to mean that it was too numerous dimension. So, for example, when the Revelations talks about the 144,000 souls, people are missing the numerology. Some have interpreted it literally, but you have a number there where we have the 12 tribes of Israel multiplied by the 12 apostles and then multiplied by the number for infinity, and you have 144,000.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be very, very cautious about these numbers, and we have to take a look at the world the way it's built and the way it's put together, because if there is a creator, the creator put it together and put it together in only one way, and whatever the truth is has to be consistent with that way. After all, it was only, what was it, in 10 years or so ago, or within the last handful of years, that the Vatican finally forgave Galileo for discovering that the sun was actually the center of the solar system?
I mean, I believe, and tell me your opinion, I believe that the ancient people actually had a better understanding of the universe, even though it didn't come from a repeatable place, like they couldn't measure gravity and they couldn't, measure things, but I feel like they had a better understanding of the natural world and what was going on that you find in stories in the Bibles and other mythology from around the world that we are now just getting to the point that we're trying to rediscover concepts that they kind of took as fact.
Yes, I would comment to that, have people think about two different aspects of what you just said. First of all, the ancients were very religious people. They lived in a world where, if your child got sick, there was no doctor to call and no drugstore down the corner where there was some miracle cure. If the rains didn't come, they didn't have irrigation that they could turn on and pump water out of the ground. If the locusts came, they didn't have insecticides, so on and so forth. So they were very religious, or you might even say very faithful people. They lived quite a bit by faith, and they accepted as reality a spiritual part of the universe. They saw spirituality as a integral part of physical reality. And so they were allowed that allowed them to look at certain things in a way that we today, from a scientific viewpoint, have kind of lost. So the combination of looking at the world that way and thinking of things in a spiritual manner have caused them to come to certain conclusions that our science today is just beginning to hit the fringes of.
Mm-hmm.
There's another point of it, too, that I might mention, and this goes back to what I was talking about the human brain being a subset of the greater universe. When you set aside certain reasonings, certain rational preconceptions, and take a look at just the face of reality for what it looks like, you can sometimes see things that would be blocked out from your vision, so to speak, by some of those rational conventions. The way I look at it is this. We take a look at a tree. It has order and structure to it. We look at a tree and we can understand parts of it naturally for what it is. The reason being is because the same order and structure and physical laws that configured the structure of that tree is the same laws and principles that configured the construction of our human brain. And therefore, when we look at that tree, our brain actually recognizes the pattern of the knowledge built into it because it's the very same pattern that's in our brains. Birds know how to build nests in trees. They don't have higher reasoning, and yet the order that's built into their brain gives forth that same knowledge of the very materials that they're using to build their nests with, that was built out of as well, if you follow what I'm saying.
No, I think that's a really great point, and that I don't think a lot of people consider, and I'm going to use your bird nest analogy. Swallows, they can tell that a nest is a swallow based on its construction, but swallows don't go to school to learn this is nest building 101. It's just part of who they are, and I don't think people even think about, well, how do they know that?
Yes, we've once again have been taught this scientific establishment assumption of instinct. Oh, it's just instinct. It's instinctive. Okay, that's fine. Define for me the mechanics of instinct. And then the voice falls silent. instinct is, to me, the same kind of word that people use in philosophy. We call things coincidence. Well, instinct to me is the same kind of a word. It is a word to speak about a phenomena for which we don't fully understand. So we assign words like coincidence or instinct. But when you really, like I said, pop the hood open and start tearing the engine apart, it's far more complex than that.
And see, I don't know that I would put coincident and instinct together. Innate, they just know. It's like, well, know how? That's the regular question. It's like, how?
Yes, I'm not saying that coincidence and instinct are similar to their nature. What I'm saying is that coincidence and instinct are two terms that are kind of thrown at a problem and makes it sound like we actually know what that is when in fact we don't. I was talking more about the state of mind from whence those kinds of terms arise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I mean, because even just that one little example of like a bird and a nest, and then, I mean, I think that animals have a higher level of consciousness because there's no way for them to be able to do what they do at all.
Yes, their brains reason. This was another thing that I was taught in school that was, I don't want to say a lie, Dr. Rita. But, yeah, maybe it was. Of course, the person who was teaching it to me wasn't trying to be a liar because they had bought the same story. And there's so many of those types of things, that animals can't reason. Well, I'm sorry, they can. They have a brain just like we do. Their brain may not be able to contain enough information. And this is the only difference that I see, Dr. Rita, that our human brains are comprehensive enough to contain enough information in it at the same time and hold a picture in the mind at the same time and hold on to it to allow us to begin to recognize greater patterns of relationships between things. And that's the only thing that really distinguishes our brains from theirs. Their brains work too. They think, they reason. Anybody that's owned animals knows that.
I know. I mean, I want to smack people that go, well, dogs aren't conscious. It's like, excuse me? It's like, I don't even know that I run my house. It's like, wait a minute, it's 4 o'clock. I got the dog. I mean, even just that one thing. Literally, it's 4 o'clock, my dog comes, like she's got a watch on, and the alarm went off, and she will come sit by my desk and stare at me. It's time.
Yeah.
It's time.
And understand, you can't even blame that. You can't even attribute that to natural instinct because the 4 o'clock type of an idea is a humanly contrived convention. And so the dog is responding to something that was contrived by human beings, not in the natural world. And that's intelligence.
But just the fact, because that's our normal, go out for a little stroll time. And, but for her to know, it's 4 o'clock. I'm just sitting here working away, doing something, and it's 4. I mean, how do they know? Cats the same way. It's like they know you're coming home, and they'll be sitting by the door waiting. How do they know? Anyway. So for all
I've got another interesting
okay, go.
Observation again. As I had mentioned earlier, what I've tried to do is to take philosophical, religious, metaphysical concepts and actually find sound, hard, physical evidence for them that everybody can look at and see, and it's not subjective. So, for example, we've all heard about the phenomena of synchronicity. Now, I take a look at the natural world and look at things like, let's say, birds, for example. Now, birds evolved from some sort of other form that they tell us, and dinosaurs, I think, but they've developed these wings, they've developed feathers, they've developed all these abilities to fly, and they have a certain genetic structure and a certain species to them. You know, birds are distinct from other types of flesh and blood animals. But now let's take a look at mammals. Let's take a look at a bat. The bat does the same thing, and it has a very similar kind of wings, and it really can fly, but it comes from a completely different evolutionary trail, so to speak, as a bird does. Now, for me, when I take a look at a bat, I take a look at a flying fish, I take a look at a flying squirrel, and I take a look at a bird, and I see a physical manifestation of what we humans call synchronicity.
Because they can all fly? I'm not totally making the connection here.
Well, synchronicity is having a meaningful pattern that connects two seemingly unassociated events. That's what synchronicity is. So we always look at that as a human experience. What I say is this, is that the fact that we recognize meaningful coincidences, which is what Carl Jung defined synchronicity as, a meaningful coincidence, within the convolutions of our brain. And since that brain is constructed according to the same laws and principles that govern the physical world, that means that we should also see a correspondence to that inner human experience at work also in the natural world. And so when I see a bird and I see a bat, I see a physical manifestation of a recognizable connection between two dissimilar objects, so to speak, that there's a connecting pattern between those two things. And to me, that's an example of synchronicity in a natural world. Do you kind of follow what I'm saying?
I mean, I do, but I'm a little brain dead today, so.
Well, understand, I know this is kind of.
I think
what
I'm just getting kind
about.
of hung up on the synchronicity word, because to me, I see that more as like coincidence, and I'm having a hard time relating it to animals. I tend to think of it as more like experiences, and I think that's where I'm personally getting kind of stuck. Well,
let me take it from a different direction, because what's been said about my work that is so groundbreaking is some of the different paradigms that I've presented. Just a different way of looking at things. I'll give you an example. When the ancients looked up at the night sky, they saw a crystalline firmament with holes punched into it, and that there was a light that was extending beyond it that shone through those little holes, and that's what we saw as the stars. And that was their paradigm. When we look at the sky today, the night sky today, our eyes don't see anything different than the ancients did. But the way that we conceive it is so completely different than it was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. We look out the universe and we understand that the stars are in different places and different distances and magnitudes, even though we're looking at the same information. So the difference between that ancient view and the modern view is the paradigm that we have in our heads. Mm-hmm. So one of the paradigms, again, that I was talking about earlier is that no subset of a greater system can operate in a way that's contrary to or outside of the laws and principles that govern the greater system. So here's what that paradigm tells us. Our human brains are intelligent. That means that the universe must also be intelligent. How could the universe have given rise to intelligence unless intelligence was built into the laws and principles of the universe? It would have produced something that was contrary to or outside of its own nature. The idea that we're alive means that the universe must also be alive. because how could it have given rise to life when it itself is not? And the fact that we create, we actually take invisible information and materialize it in the physical world, just like the telephone I'm holding, just like the computers that people might be listening to this show to. None of those things can exist in the natural world. We've created them. And since we have the ability to take invisible information and materialize it into physical reality, i.e., create, then the universe itself must also be creative. Now, if our intelligence is reflected by the intelligence that's built into the universe, then that means the universe is built according to the same order that orders and structures our own intelligence. That means if we have an inner experience that we recognize as synchronicity, there also has to be a visible manifestation of it in the physical reality, the universe itself, which is physically configured to the same order and structure from which our own intelligence is. And the idea of the bird and the bat, I say, is a visible example of that synchronicity going on in that greater intelligence.
Okay, I get it now. I mean, you're very insightful. I'm enjoying this conversation. I'm going, dang, we only have 7 minutes left. And we haven't even gotten into ghosts or any, spooky stuff or anything. So I'm just going to throw this out up front. We'll just have to have you come back to get into that whole topic, because that's an entire show right there. And then the phones can just keep hanging up on themselves. And
there you go. But to mention that subject real briefly, once again, paranormal phenomena, the things that we see in haunted houses are observable physical reality. They are a physical effect, even though we don't understand the physical cause. It's like looking at gravitational effect and not really understanding the cause of gravity itself. So if they are physically observable, that they disturb airwaves in the same way as vocal cords do, so that the physics of sound and an audible voice come to our ears. They deflect photons in the exact same way that solid objects do, so that we actually see an apparition from the photons reflecting off of it into our eyes. Then these things must occur according to the same physical laws and principles that govern the greater universe in which they are a subset of. And this is the thinking behind some of my different paradigms that have opened up this whole new area of thought. With David Roundtree, for example, we were mentioning to him about him earlier. He has conducted some very unique and unusual experiments in the field of paranormal phenomena. Well, lo and behold, we first met each other a couple months ago on an interview, and we're comparing notes. And here we find out that my theory in my book actually makes the predictions that his experiments have verified.
No way. That's extra super cool. Okay, don't tell too much. Maybe I'll have to have the two of you come on. I don't know.
That would be
kind
cool,
of fun.
too.
That would be interesting. Cool, Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, because one of the things about David that I love is that he's so, scientific-minded, and I really enjoyed having him on. I enjoy getting into conversations because, there's one thing about going out and looking at stuff and saying things, because it's fun. And then there's another reason for going out and doing stuff and investigating material like you're looking at, or paranormal phenomena or whatever, is to have a deeper understanding of what it is and what its nature is. I'm more the philosophical side, sorry to say, but I totally appreciate the scientific side and support the people that are looking to create that tangible, create that repeatableness that you sciencey guys kind of like. You like equipment. Not so big on equipment. So.
Well, David's certainly an expert in that part of the field, that's for sure. I'm more of an armchair quarterback. I sit back and theorize on things. But yeah, you have a doctorate. You are one of the people that would understand the impact, the astounding significance of what I just said about finding someone who has experimentally verified aspects of such a theory that I'm talking about.
Well, but it's giving it the repeatableness, or it's giving it the validation on the other side. It's kind of like what you were talking about with the gravitons or the dark matter. It fits really good into theory, but there's no evidence, physical evidence, at least at this point in time, and I'm going to put it that way, at least at this point in time, to totally support it. Now you're starting to get some evidence. Here's the theory. This is how gravity should work. Oh, look, we have gravity happening over here, and it fits right into these calculations or measurements or whatever the theory goes into. So that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say that right? Am I close?
Oh, yeah, you did it great. I know we're getting to the end of our hour here, but I'm going to leave you all with a little tidbit to think about. This is part of my new paradigm, too. It's been a traditional view that mass or matter bends the space around it, which in turn causes the effect that we know as gravity. That's the Einsteinian model. According to my model, it is the bending of space which not only produces the effect of gravity, but within which bends materializes physical reality. In other words, the bending of space is not the effect, it's the cause.
And so in all these little pockets, kind of like little divots in the road, it's collecting water or matter and creating form, kind of.
It's actually, yes. You could think about it, it's creating an environment where vapor can condense into water.
Interesting viewpoint. So I'm looking at the clock, from a scientific, I don't know how far you get into the physics of it. Would it, from a physics point of view, is it supportable by the numbers? Do you know?
Well, absolutely, because the numbers only speak of gravitational effect. And so the gravitational effect would still be there. But from a scientific viewpoint, what it helps us is it helps us explain why we can't find a graviton, why we can't find a wave of gravity, why we can't nail down a Higgs boson or a Higgs field, why we can't reconcile gravity with quantum physics and relativity, why we can't get a unified field of theory of everything mathematically when we can't express gravity through 4 dimensions. All these kinds of questions are answered by this model.
And so is this model, because we're hitting time, is this information in the Behind the Cosmic Veil book?
Yes, it is.
Well, all right. Thomas, give out your webpage real quick, and then we have to go.
Okay. Everything can be found out about the book and where to order it, different articles related to it, and a contact email address for me at www.cosmicveil, spelled V-E-I-L, cosmicveil.com.
Excellent. Thomas, you're very cool, and we'll have you back on, and maybe we'll get David on, and we can talk about the whole paranormal, psychic, dealy thing, and that would be fun.
Yes, it would. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
All right, Thomas, I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye. That's Thomas Fusco, his book, Behind the Cosmic Veil. We'll be back with Eldon Taylor after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.